Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is West Coast editor James Riswick. How's it going, man?
Good. It's very hot. We're getting attacked by another heat dome.
Likewise. But hey, we've got a great podcast for you guys today. We're going to run through several Hyundais. The Santa Cruz. This is the pickup truck-like thing that James drove recently. Just actually got back from it. Very excited to hear about this. He actually got some time in the Kona N. That is a review that you're not going to read everywhere. James drove that a little bit more than some of the other people on that trip, so I'm excited to hear more about that. I just drove the Hyundai Elantra Hybrid, so we're kind of working our way down here from exciting to less exciting. There's a couple other things like the Acura Type S and the Genesis G70. Touch on here at the end of our reviews segment. Big news, Lamborghini has a new Countach, or so they say, or something like it. We'll hear more about that coming up this weekend at Pebble Beach. By the time you listen to this, probably have the full story up on our site. And finally, we'll spend some money. But let's get into the Santa Cruz. This is the pickup truck. We first saw it, I believe, the Detroit Auto Show back in 2015. Truck looks pretty familiar, pretty similar to that concept. I think it looks pretty good. It, of course, is going to be benchmarked against the Ford Maverick. This goes in a pretty different direction, though, to put it mildly. So just some initial impressions, James. I mean, this is one of the most important things Hyundai will do this year. What did you think?
Yeah, and there's a lot of angles I could go with here. So it's interesting you say it's one of the most important things Hyundai could do. Or it could not matter at all. It could just be this weird niche thing that nobody buys. We don't know. That's kind of the interesting thing about the Santa Cruz, because it's a compact crossover pickup. Well, there's nothing like that. Currently, there will be, as you mentioned, the Ford Maverick. But as you also said, they are very different. Both Ford and Hyundai had the same idea. Let's make a compact crossover pickup, but they went in completely different directions. The Santa Cruz is, more, let's say, non-traditional in its pickup look. It's more like, let's say, an Australian ute than just this mini boxy pickup truck like the Maverick. Historically, you would think that the boxy traditional pickup thing is going to do better amongst truck people. However, I don't really think of this as like, if you're going to go after a Ford Ranger, a Chevy Colorado, you're just going to dismiss the Santa Cruz entirely because it's a crossover, because it's small, because it looks not like every other truck. Instead, if this will be successful, it's because the people who would have otherwise bought a Subaru Crosstrek Forester, the outdoor adventure set, will find that the functionality of a pickup bed is more useful to them than an enclosed cargo space. Whatever that could mean to them, I don't know. And there's some logic there. It has about 4.3 feet of bed length, which is rinky-dink for a pickup truck, but is very long compared to a cargo area of an SUV. A Honda CR-V, which is one of the biggest compact crossovers, is like 37 inches. Well, this is 52. So you're going to be able to have more space, and obviously it has infinity inches of cargo height versus just any cargo height restrictions. There's also a lot of versatility in that pickup bed. Most specifically and impressively, it has a garage door style rolling cargo cover. It's rigid, it's easy to use, and it's lockable. No other truck has this, and it also kind of addresses the pain point that I would have, and many other people would have, about getting a pickup, is that you lose the lockable, dry cargo capacity of an SUV when you go with one. And otherwise, you have to get this big old clamshell you have to remove, or, the big folding vinyl thing you'd also have to remove. This comes along with you. Really clever feature. I'd be curious to see if this moves on to other regular trucks, or if there's some, a bigger space is harder to cover in this way. I don't know, but it's a very clever thing. There's also a trunk, kind of like a Honda Ridgeline. It's maybe about 40% of the size of that, so it's not nearly as useful, but it exists. There's also some other storage things back here, different tie-down points. So it's a versatile space. And, that again could appeal to people instead of a compact crossover. But the big thing is, are people actually looking for that? I don't know. It's just such a different car, or just such a different vehicle, that it's really hard to gauge how well this will do. Is this like, aha, Hyundai's onto something, we're going to see 18 more of these, much like we did subcompact crossovers a short while ago. Is it going to be just a complete dead-end niche Subaru Baja? We'll look back and go, that was neat, and it'll be on Cars and Bids in 10 years. Or will it be like, that was the right idea, but their execution was off and Ford did it better? That's really what people were looking for. We don't know.
Yeah.
Time will tell. I really like the thing. It looks sensational in person. Really well. And, the Elantra and the Tucson kind of went overboard, in my opinion, in terms of the let's make this interesting. This isn't as sharp like looking. It's really nicely proportioned, and it's not just like a Tucson with the bed chopped off. It's not like the Ridgeline was. It looks great in person. It's also very legitimately sporty to drive. For a compact crossover, never mind pickup, it doesn't feel remotely like a pickup to drive. So this, regardless of what's going on behind the C-pillar, this would be considered one of the sportier, more engaging compact crossovers. I really enjoyed it. The interior is lovely. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was... Now, let's back up a couple of steps here. This might be a little inside baseball, but so this was the first press event I have attended since February of 2020. Now, normally, in the past, we go on press events to drive a new car when it comes out, because quite simply, it's easier to fly in 80 to 100 journalists into one location to drive 25 different cars than it is to ship out 25 cars all over the place, which takes forever and it's a logistical nightmare, which is what car companies were forced to do during COVID. So this was one of my first press events back. Now, during that COVID era, which we are still in, but emerging from in terms of vehicle testing, we'd find out about cars. We'd have question and answer Zoom calls. You could ask maybe one question, but you'd have no follow-up, and there's no casual interaction with engineers and designers. That's what you get on a press event. That really is the benefit of them. And one of the things while on this press event I found myself at dinner with both the design director as well as one of the engineers. They don't hang out together. It's the left arm and the right arm, and they don't really end up. So I'm chatting with them, and the design director says that, what we were going with was to achieve a look that was both muscular and tough, kind of like the truck thing, but also sporty, because it was going to be like an urban environment, clearly more of an on-road vehicle. And the design and the engineer stepped up and says, actually, it's because you guys made it sporty looking that we decided to make it sporty to drive. It was just like this neat little moment where, I never would have gotten that on Zoom beforehand. But also, from the car's perspective, it shows that, design actually can play a role in what the car actually ends up being. And they in both in terms of looking sporty as well as driving sporty, both teams absolutely succeeded, despite the fact that they didn't necessarily know what each other was doing. So,
man, all that even before the appetizer, that's a pretty good press dinner right there.
Yeah, actually, it was during cocktail hour
even better.
But yeah,
even better. I am very excited about this. I read your review, a couple days ago, and then that morning, an invite for a local drive came in, and I kind of looked around the room and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take this one, guys. I want to go drive this thing. This sounds awesome. So, yeah, to me, it's a very intriguing product. It's got an interesting mission, one that has not always succeeded. Frankly, it's probably failed more than succeeded, if you will. A lot of the things they're going for remind me of like what Honda did way back when the Ridgeline originally launched. They were like, hey, we're going to try and grow sort of our crossover market space using this footprint, as opposed to like going after the traditional truck buyer. To me, the Maverick is just basically it's a Ford truck in a different size, not even really a different shape. It's a truck. It's just what size Ford truck do you take? Now, to me, many of the Hyundai Santa Cruz buyers are not even going to look at the Maverick. They might naturally just because, Google search, you're going to get those sorts of things. But to me, based on what you're saying, it's a little bit of a different type of buyer, it sounds like. Some of the very clever things with the bed, very appealing to me because, what does a short bed really get you? If you're getting a truck, like even like the Ranger doesn't have, in some of the shorter configurations, it's not all that big of a truck. So it's, it's appealing. It's interesting. I think, the sporty ethos that you mentioned could make this like a modern day El Camino. I'm sure that came up like once or twice on the press trip or something. But even just looking at the pictures, this actually has a sportier stance than many of the like athletic air quotes crossovers that we see out there. Like looking at it from the back three quarters, it's almost got like a sports sedan vibe. So, what'd you think of the powertrain?
Well, I only tested the turbo engine, which has more power than a Ford Ranger, and it weighs hundreds of pounds less. So it's got guts. I did not drive the base engine, and Byron has indicated that when in service in the Tucson, albeit with a little less power, that's not particularly impressive. So it's disappointed we didn't get to drive that. Also, the Maverick has a hybrid that gets 37 miles per gallon versus like 23 in the Tucson. That's an advantage. And that could just really, if you are comparing the two, that could just put it completely out of reach and make the Ford the default choice. The other thing is the Ford's a lot cheaper, like $5,000, $4,500, $5,000. Now, you get more equipment on the Hyundai. You have a better warranty. It has a nicer interior. We haven't driven the Maverick, but we've sat in the Maverick, and although it's perfectly fine, Tucson or the Santa Cruz has a nicer interior. Also, if we assume the Maverick drives like a Bronco Sport, the Santa Cruz is more refined and sportier to drive than that. So, the other thing is that turbo engine, which is so good, is only available starting around $36,000 on the SEL Premium. I don't think, whereas the Maverick is available right from the beginning. I don't think that's such a great idea. Like that turbo engine is, and again, maybe people don't care. I mean, if we're talking about Subaru Crosstrek buyers, they clearly do not care about acceleration in their vehicle. So maybe it's a moot point. But making it a little more accessible at a lower price point wouldn't be a bad idea.
One thing, I know you mentioned you didn't get a chance to drive the 2.5 liter, which is 191 horsepower.
Yeah.
That engine, to me, I think gives them a little bit of breathing room to maybe try to compete for some sales volume against the Maverick, at least on price as well. Sounds like this vehicle handles pretty well. So almost 200 horsepower, that could probably get the job done, if you will. So I'm at least intrigued by it.
But that like 191 horsepower is basically what you get in all of those compact crossovers, CRV,
right,
and RAV4, and all that. It's the same ballpark. So it's not like you have some underpowered lump. And 2.5 liters is pretty big displacement. It's the same displacement for the turbo, by the way, which if you're talking real world fuel economy, it's far more likely that you'll get closer to EPA fuel economy with a bigger displacement turbo than you would with, say, the 2 liter in a Maverick. That's just kind of how it works. Going back, though, another interesting thing was, let's talk about the C-pillar for a second. So this was a big deal. This was one thing that the designer said that like they mulled over for a long time because, like, as you recall, Honda Ridgeline, one of the big things people complained about was it had this weird funky buttress thing at the back end that made it look weird and hampered its functionality, yada, yada, yada. And the designers of Santa Cruz went back and forth a lot because it's one of the key elements, although compared to the concept, pretty similar silhouette here, but that C-pillar is different. And so they went back and forth. They tried strict boxy C-pillar, kind of like the second generation Ridgeline or every pickup, which is clearly more of a pickup look. People accept that. But then they said, you know, this isn't clearly a traditional pickup. We shouldn't make it traditional. He also admitted that they've tried a Tesla Cybertruck-like thing before the Cybertruck even came out, where the C-pillar basically it just went all the way to the back of the tailgate. But then they thought, that's really exotic and weird, and people might not know what this thing is and be completely put off by it, and just dismiss it. Not unlike the Tesla Cybertruck, frankly. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And what they came up with was definitely something closer to, say, traditional than what the concept is, but still not traditional. And I think that's part of the reason why it works from a visual standpoint. It's because that really severe right angle pickup bed does make it difficult to make the silhouette of a truck look very good. But this is just enough of a rake and an angle. But in that, you could kind of see the evolution of their design process, as well as the transformation from this Santa Cruz concept to production form, because that came out in 2015. It was years ago. This is on a completely different platform, a new platform. They also have Hyundai's new design language that they needed to apply to it. And the end result, I would say, is the rare production vehicle that looks much better than the concept.
Yeah, that's fair. You have a picture of the concept in your story. You dusted off one of those archival, if you will, 2015 shots. And yeah, I'd agree with that. I think this looks better than the Tesla Cybertruck, which, I mean, that's not setting the bar particularly high, but some people like that, ambitious approach. But to me, this is a very exciting looking vehicle, which you don't see as much. The car industry, outside of the sports cars, if you will, I think it's a little tough to get certain things to look the way you want them to. And this is cool. Yeah. I mean, they nailed it in that sense. Cool. Any final thoughts on the Santa Cruz?
No, I mean, only, and we can just, I can use this as a segue here, but I actually drove the Santa Cruz after the Kona N.
Okay.
And I was expecting, worried a bit that doing so would kind of unfairly handicap the Santa Cruz. Like, well, clearly this is going to drive worse, but it might seem like it's going to drive even worse after driving the little hot hatch thing. Yeah. Turns out, no, actually, clearly they're in different leagues, but they're playing the same game. Like it's surprisingly sporty and good to drive the Santa Cruz. But yeah, I did get to drive the Kona N quite a lot.
You spent the morning driving the Kona N, it sounds like?
I did. I did. And so the Kona N is, obviously, as the name would suggest, it is the extra sporty version of the Hyundai Kona. Now, honestly, I'm always pretty skeptical about, high horsepowered compact vehicles, especially SUVs. Nightmares of SRT calibers still reign in my head, and crude things like the Cobalt SS, the Saturn Ion. So anytime you just put a lot of power into something front wheel drive, you just like, is this really going to be that great? It's just, no, it won't. It'll die, and we'll still be driving GTIs. The Kona N is surprisingly very well polished. Yes, it has 276 horsepower, 289 pound-feet of torque, but it controls it very well. This is not some wheel sawing event like the Mazda Speed 3. The general chassis composure is very well sorted. You know, the engineer said that effectively that the Kona N is a Veloster N with a Kona body plopped on top. And there's a level of chassis sophistication here that I was just not expecting. I mean, it has 3 levels of suspension firmness. And there's actually definitely a difference amongst them all. But there's 3 levels for everything: steering and the exhaust, which sounds really cool without venturing into obnoxious, farty, poppy, crackling territory. So I was really in. Yes, it is a subcompact SUV, and yes, they actually didn't lower the thing. In fact, it's 0.1 inch higher than the regular Kona in terms of ground clearance. Yes, it's 6 inches taller total than a Veloster N, but the thing feels like a hot hatch, like a legitimate hot hatch. It doesn't feel tippy or like, say, like a GLA 35 does, where you do feel that extra space. But I didn't in this, because it's still like really small. The Kona is a small vehicle. Wheels are pushed out to the corners. And, you know, this is not an X5M. It weighs basically the same as a GTI. So it really surprised me as its refinement surprised me, as how fun to drive it was, but also kind of it took its job seriously. It was actually quite comfortable. Put it in normal, and that suspension and the level of quiet in the cabin was very good on the highway, which isn't always the case with these sporty compact vehicles, or even subcompact SUVs for that matter. So yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised, and I absolutely enjoyed driving it.
I have been generally impressed with the Kona over the years. I feel like it's a little bit of a sleeper in the segment. It's got a different look, if you will. In some ways, I think it's even different than much of the rest of the Hyundai lineup. You know, with the launch of the new Sonata, then you get the Elantra, then you have the Palisade, and that kind of cascades down to like the Santa Fe a little bit. Then you have this thing, you know, which along with the Veloster, you know, they kind of are more like off over here, you know, in their own space, giving you a different vibe, a little bit different, edgier. What you just said, like kind of off the top, is something I really like, is that the car is actually the crossover, if you will. They didn't lower it, you know, it's even taller. I think that's awesome. That's authentic. That's almost like old school. Like, we're going to take this thing and stuff a big motor in it and then kind of work from there. So, you know, I think that's something to be, you know, applauded in some ways. And I actually think it's kind of interesting the way Hyundai continues to invest and create compelling products with the N badge. You know, like for a while it seemed like, well, what are you guys doing with this? You know, they created some interesting things. And then, you know, the world is obviously changing with more and more like electric things coming down the road here. I think you could make a reasonable case, hey, this isn't something you need to totally be dealing with right now. But they've really made credible entries. So this is another one that I'm quite excited to get behind the wheel of.
Yeah, and they've said that don't expect a Santa Fe or a Palisade N. They're going to be actually only doing smaller things that are appropriate for it and more eco-friendly. So they aren't dropping the the GV80s engine into a Palisade or something. They absolutely did not deny that there's going to be an Ioniq 5N.
Okay.
So, and if there is, that judging by this, it's going to be great. And, you know, to your point, that the Kona, the regular Kona, is really fun to drive. It's shock, even with like the base engine. And it has been from the very beginning, when when it came out, we had like the HRV and I think we had a Crosstrek and the Renegade, or just the small number of subcompact SUV, and none of them were good to drive. Like they're just dreary and kind of depressing. And then here comes the Kona, which was sharp and agile, and legitimately fun. And it had an available turbo engine that just obliterated the competition. Like no one came close to it. This, meanwhile, has 81 more horsepower than that. And I didn't even touch on this, but this has something called N-Grin Shift. It's a big red button on the steering wheel, and you press it, and for 20 seconds, which you know you get 20 because there's literally a countdown in the digital instrument cluster, you get, let me get this right here, you get, the output is cranked up to 286 horsepower from 276, so they crank up the boost. The transmissions keeps the revs high, and it feels like you've just like run over the gold star in Mario Kart. It's just like this kind of crazy I don't know how quicker it actually ends up being. It just feels a bit unhinged and silly. And despite the rest of the dynamic package being quite serious, it's just like a nice moment of levity and fun to press that button and just let it loose for 20 seconds. It
sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's just like this nice balance of a serious vehicle in terms of capability with a few fun touches without going completely mini. So yeah, that was neat as well.
It's interesting. I was looking back at the Kona in our 2019 small crossover test. It actually came in second, very competitive to the Kia Soul. Beat out the Renegade and the HRV, which I think in hindsight that stands up pretty well as far as the two it beat out. And, you know, it's obviously very competitive against the Soul. So,
well, its downside is that it doesn't have much space. So in a way, like, you know, the Fiesta ST is gone, unfortunately, and this isn't quite the big barrel of monkeys that car was, and will probably forever live as a cult classic, but it's not that far off.
Well, I guess we should keep talking Hyundai. It just seems like that's the only thing we're going to talk about on this show, right?
Yeah, it's that week, and there's even a Genesis parked out front right now, so the variety is not going to be...
Well, we'll get into the Genesis, but we will break it up with an Acura Type S, which I think, you know, hey, we got to play the hits here a little bit. I had an Elantra Hybrid that I will probably save a little bit more of this for, like, you know, another show if we need to get in more into this car, if you will. But yeah, I took it for a little bit of driving so far, and it's the hybrid version of the Elantra, which I think is a good thing. I think it's pretty fun to drive car. You know, the hybrid powertrain makes the Elantra a little gutsier, actually. It's one of those cars where you get that sort of electrical assist and away you go. I like the Elantra. I think it's a really handsome car. It's like a mini Sonata, and in some ways I think that aggressive design sort of hangs better on a smaller package, if you will. So yeah, I mean, it's fun to drive. I think Hyundai is, I think they're almost like old school, like in terms of like if 2010 could be old school. Like, it reminds me of how they were more aggressive with the Sonata and the Elantra design, and it pays off for them. I think sort of in the middle part of the last decade, they tried to be a little more conventional, and for me, that wasn't what I was liking. But, you know, again, for these two sedans, I think they're both very competitive. Trunk is pretty good sized. You know, it's a nice option, I'll say, to put it that way, in the Elantra lineup. And I think it's good to see a company invest in sedans, you know. So yeah, I mean, there's not a ton to say about this. Let me put it that way. We're talking about an Elantra Hybrid here. But, you know, again, enjoyable to drive. One of the Easter eggs, I don't know if you've noticed this about Hyundai radios, is when you just have like the radio setting queued up in the infotainment system, they have vacuum tubes, like old school radios. Yep. And I just this is the third straight Hyundai I've had in probably the last 2 months that has this. And I just love it. it's so cool. Then when you change the channel, like the bulb kind of moves a little bit. So that
Yep.
has not much to do with this car because it's available in many Hyundais, but just another little thing I noticed this morning and brought a smile to my face.
I think that's something that's been added in the last year because I don't remember the Palisade having that originally. The Santa Cruz is the first Hyundai I've noticed with it.
Okay.
And actually, I think this Genesis might have the exact same thing. I could be wrong, but I think it does. It's the G70, by the way. If you're wondering what we're talking about in my Santa Cruz first drive, I did get a picture of it in the interior. So yeah, it's a neat little design choice, to be sure.
I noticed it because I had the Palisade for probably a good 5, 6 weeks, if you will, or long term. It wasn't in there, at least that I noticed. I assumed there was,
that's it,
unless it was configured wrong or different or something. But then I had,
yeah, I bet you it's a 2022 thing.
yeah. Because the very next week, a Santa Fe arrived and like, well, wait a minute, what's this? This is cool. And now I'm in my Elantra Hybrid. So, yeah.
Yeah, the to your point about the styling and it being, they're going for more of an ambitious look, unabashedly ambitious. Because frankly, I think it looks bonkers, and it's a little much. But in that discussion with the designer and the engineer, like they confirmed that, like, yeah, we went a little conservative in the last generation, and it backfired. It did not. Anytime Hyundai has gotten more attention when we have been bolder. Like, look at the Sonata from like '08, because that hit. And I had the designer of the current Toyota Camry. I asked him, what vehicles come along that just like floored you guys? Like you weren't expecting it and just it was a game changer. And he said that Sonata. It came out of left field. They had no idea that it was just so radical. And it absolutely changed the way sedans looked. Like you could be bolder after that point. And that totally changed the way Toyota went about that, at least particular Toyota designer went about it. And, Hyundai went conservative for its successor, and it didn't do well. You look at the sales, and they went down for reasons other than before sales of sedans in general plunged into the toilet. But, they leaned into it with this generation of cars. And the other thing is, Hyundai does not go for the Russian nesting doll school of vehicle design, where like the C-Class has to look like the E-Class, which has to look like the S-Class, which even the Germans haven't always done. Look at the late 90s, for instance. Instead of the Russian nesting doll, what they describe it as is like a chess set, where the rook and the pawn and the king and the queen, they're clearly different things, but they all kind of have a common look to them. Like they all belong together in a set. And that's what Hyundai's trying to do with their lineup. Personally, I think it's great. I like that. It's like there's cohesion here, but it's not just like the same thing in different sizes. I also think from a practical perspective, that makes it a lot easier for a car to stay on the market without necessitating a mid-cycle refresh, so that you don't have to make the E-Class look like the new, like graft on new S-Class cues onto an E-Class, which you get and you end up with awkward looking vehicles. You can just keep it the way it is because that's just the way the Sonata looks. And, it's easier to evolve your design language that way. I think it's smart, and I think it's also easier to differentiate cars, which is always good.
Same. I think, ironically, General Motors, which frankly pioneered many of the design elements, like going back, half a century or more, when they were doing design at like the peak of their stylistic powers, they knew how to design a different car, different truck for each segment. And the industry took a long time to catch up to that, frankly. And I think right now that's the mark of a company that's doing things right, is they, your chess analogy is very apropos. Do you play chess?
No, I'm strictly using their analogy. That's their term, not mine. The other thing with this is you avoid like the Lincoln problem where like you come out with this new front end corporate look, like that bow wave whale thing that everybody hates, but unfortunately now you're married to it and like all your cars need to have this horrid thing that no one likes. Whereas with Hyundai, it's like, let's say, no, everybody, the Elantra is laughable. Everybody hates it. No one wants it. It's made fun of. Okay, well, you can get rid of that. But don't worry, all your other cars don't look like that. So it's not like you're married to this one, like, it's easier to explore the space, to try different things in that scenario.
All right, let's shift gears over to the Genesis G70 that's parked outside.
Yeah, well, for 2022, mechanically unchanged, but speaking of design updates and common design language, Genesis does kind of have a common design language, and that has been grafted onto the G70. So it's a little more effective up front with its split level headlights and the bolder grille, and at the back you have the oval Bentley-ish tailpipe holes. You can definitely see the regular old tail muffler tips behind it. So I think it looks better from the front. Take it or leave it from the back. The interior basically looks the same, but it has the 10.25-inch touchscreen we were talking about earlier with some different reskinning in places for Genesis, but it's basically the same system. No problem there. It works. Who cares if it's also in a Sonata and a Santa Cruz? And then also it has a part digital instrument panel, again, to kind of inject some of the more recent Hyundai Group technologies, such as that the blind spot camera that pops up, which is in our Palisade, which won Autoblog's Technology of the Year for its use in the Kia Telluride. So that's kind of the updates. Otherwise, it's still just a wonderful little overpowered little sports sedan, and it's a joy to drive. I do kind of enjoy throwing around more than a 3 Series. I think I like the CT4, the Cadillac, a little better. That's and the two are actually very similar because they're very small. Both in terms of the CT4 and the G70 are very similar in that they're rear wheel drive, priced more like one of those, like a 2 Series Grand Coupe or an A-Class. There's not a lot of trunk space in either of them, not a lot of back seat space in them, kind of like sport sedans used to be like. So I'm not going to criticize them for those things because, we did that with 3 Series, and now the 3 Series is the size of a 5 Series from 20 years ago. So, careful what you complain about. Yeah, a lot of fun. And, I had the TLX Type S maybe 3 weeks ago. And, that car just doesn't have the same sort of connection with the driver that the Genesis does. But it does have that SHAWD torque vectoring all-wheel drive system, which makes it really something. That is one very impressive car to drive. You can go very quick. You're kind of astonished by its agility, but that's the case with everything with SHAWD. And that extra power absolutely does make a difference for the TLX, as does the redone transmission. Because the one in our long-term TLX, and I haven't driven that car, but I've driven one like it really just feels like an Accord's transmission has been put into a luxury car. Yeah, there's a sport mode, but you break into a corner and it does not downshift quick enough or enough, and then is way too quick to upshift again. The one in the Type S does it the right way, and frankly, they just put it in all of the TLXs. If you're going to say your car is a sports sedan, it should have a transmission to match, and yeah, that one is. That said, the Genesis does it a little better than that. So I don't know. Have you had the Type S yet?
I have not. However,
Okay.
You are, I believe, the third person, at least associated with Autoblog, to drive it. We We sent one of our contributors, Bazem Wazif, to do the first drive out, I think at Willow, if I'm remembering right. Zach had it, road test editor, Zach Palmer had it fairly recently too. So this is another one that I'm hoping maybe kind of winds its way back through the fleet, get some time in it. I spent a month on our long-term TLX right when we got it. Funny story, you may or may not know this. They had been saying, hey, you guys want to get a TLX? We could get it for you. Like, yeah, no, that'd be great. What's your timeline? And, these things go. It'd take a few weeks back and forth emails, get the insurance lined up. And I had a lovely blue one in my driveway, and I get this email from the Acura PR guy saying, great, it's been delivered. I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, you can just take the short-term one that you have. That is now Autoblog's. So, hey, why not? Sure. So that car stayed with me for 4 or 5 weeks. And, transmission, I would agree with you. I think there's something lacking there in the non-Type S models. Love how the car looks in its basic trim, if you will. 2-liter turbo, I actually think is about enough for me. The Type S, motor, you get a little more power, bit more power actually. But, for me, I'm okay with the TLX and its more distilled, simplistic, form. But very eager to try that Type S.
One other thing you don't get with any of the other TLXs is the gold paint. But the one I had was the gold paint. And we often say gold, and really it's just kind of yellow. No, this is gold.
Yeah.
Like gold finger, gold. Like it's metallic. You want to get attention? Like drive a yellow car. But if you really want attention, paint it gold. It's a little much. It's a little much. As my wife said, I'm not often embarrassed by the cars you drive, but this one, it is. So, much like complaining about the trunks and back seats of compact sports sedans, I'm not going to complain too much about a color on a car, but because everything's gray, white, and black, but probably not the one I'd pick. And I guess I'd like Phoenix yellow BMW M3s from back of the day. That's different. Those weren't like this gold.
This reminds me of the Notre Dame football helmets. And I mean the ones they went to, in the last few years where they're like metallic and gold, like, that's this car is what it is. So to me, I would agree with you. It's a bit much. If I were going to buy the Type S, sometimes when they offer you like a weird kind of option like this, and again, this is my hypothetical buying scenario, I'm like, yeah, I might do that. Just be a little weird. If you're going to go buy this part of the car, embrace all of what they're going for. I probably wouldn't though, just because like, I don't know. I literally was watching an old Notre Dame game on TV the other night. It's like, oh yeah, their helmets used to just be kind of like normal gold. Now they're like spray painted, lacquered up, spotlight gold.
I don't.
And that's what this car kind of is.
I guess I don't like gold. Like I don't want a car that's gold. That seems nuts.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But otherwise, give me something bright. And otherwise, it kind of said like I kind of like subdued cars should have bright colors, and bright brash cars should have. I want a black Ferrari and a Imola red like E90 BMW.
Sounds pretty good.
That kind of thing.
Speaking of bright cars often that are a little bonkers, it sounds like we may be getting a new Countach. By the time you listen to this podcast, assuming it drops on this Friday, which it will, you may or may not have seen it, but we think it's going to debut in some form over the Monterey Vintage Car Week. That's this weekend, obviously, coming up. So depending on when you download this, depending on when they actually reveal it, you may or may not know more than we do as we talk about it now on Wednesday. But the teaser, which came out, they sort of confirmed the name was coming back. And then another one showed up that we reported on. We updated our story with like another teaser where you can see the silhouette of the car, much like my Google Hangouts call right now. It's very dark and shadowy. We're getting hit with a thunderstorm. And that's how this car kind of appears out of the mist. So you see the familiar shape, but that's about all you see. I drove the Countach once in Miami. This was like an '89, I want to say. The car was an 89. I did not drive it in 1989. I was not able to drive a car in 1989. But I love the idea that they're going for it. They're bringing the name back. And that's about all we really know. But I think it's kind of they're definitely going for the poster on the wall kind of swing here. And, hey, why not?
We'll see. I mean, the again, we haven't seen it. So just what's under the cover doesn't look that different in terms of shape of their current design. And Lamborghini's been kind of sticking with that look for quite some time now. The fact that it's owned by Audi probably isn't helping that. Speaking of Russian nesting doll design language. So I don't know. I struggle to think that this isn't more than just a marketing exercise where Lamborghini's finding that they're having a harder time to get attention to themselves, just simply being Lamborghini, and perhaps coming out with a model name that everybody remembers and is familiar with might get it more attention. Just, if this was the Lamborghini insert name of bull, would we really be talking about it? Would it get national headlines like the Countach is coming back? I don't think so. It would just be like another Lamborghini. So we'll see. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Again, listening to this in the future, you've seen it, we haven't. Again, I have a hard time not thinking of it just as kind of more of a marketing exercise. The name, at least.
Okay, so let's spend some money. Lee is writing us with the idea of replacing a 2013 Ford Edge. Okay, it's one of the long-running family trucksters, I guess. It has over 175,000 miles on it. So that Edge has served Lee and his family quite well. He and his wife are looking for something that could be 3 rows. There's a little bit of flexibility in there. Does not want to get a minivan. The budget's 40 grand. They're looking for 2018 or newer. Some of the features they're looking for: remote start, leather interior, heated seats, Apple CarPlay, and a bench second row. Let's see. His wife is interested in some of these things, and she also wants it to drive as much like a car as possible, as opposed to a minivan or something else. Here's the candidates: Kia Telluride, VW Atlas, Mazda CX-9, and Chevy Blazer. He knows the Blazer is 2 rows, but they like it. That's how car buying is. And yeah, so that's what they're looking for there. Other things that have been eliminated: Honda Pilot, Chevy Traverse, Buick Enclave, Dodge Durango, Ford Explorer, and GMC Acadia. So that is the long and short of it, if you will. I've got a couple ideas here, but I will kick it over to you, James. What do you think?
Well, first, if you've reached capacity on a 2013 Edge, I can't imagine how the Blazer is going to be big enough for you, because that's smaller in terms of actual capacity. So I had a friend. She was looking for a 3-row crossover, thought about the Telluride, but basically everyone discovered that they're A, not available, or B, $5 grand over invoice or $5 grand over MSRP. So they might as well not exist. But she discovered that there's another 3-row crossover at the Kia store called the Sorento. And it's not quite as big, which, if you're considering a Blazer, I don't think should be a problem, but it is bigger than the typical mid-size 2-row SUV. The 3rd row is perfectly usable. It's about what you'd find in a Toyota Highlander. And you get all the features that you'd get in a Telluride, and it's more efficient, and it should be really nice to drive. I personally have not driven the Sorento, but there's more editors around us. And John Snyder said, yeah, it was very enjoyable, above average crossover, 3-row crossover. The only other thing that wasn't mentioned there, I have forgotten. Otherwise, the CX-9 is the really good choice. If you don't want something that drives at all, if you want something to drive like a car, that's your best choice. So,
good choices. I like the CX-9 if that's what you're going for. Blazer's fine. I think it looks pretty good, actually. I think they actually I'm going to kind of, sound a little cheesy here, but I would say it looks arguably as much like a Camaro as the Mach-E looks like a Mustang. If you want to really look at what they're doing and where they're going, I do think it's a very good looking sporty car, crossover. But if the edge is too much or too little, the Blazer, you're just changing, like you're going from Ford to Chevy. It's not going to really meet your needs. I would do Telluride. It's, I think, a very handsome vehicle. Again, we have a long-term Hyundai Palisade. I adore that thing. It's really, I think one of the more better received vehicles we've had come through our long-term fleet in quite some time. So you're not going to go wrong with either of those two options. I know, you're kind of looking for something that handles a little more sporty, or at least not like a minivan. Perhaps the Subaru Outback, which, is a large crossover type of vehicle. A little bit more of the wagon dynamics. Take a look at that. Certainly, you get some of that Subaru outdoorsy equity if that's like your, what you're going for. That could be interesting. And that's where I would land. So right back, let us know, if you have any more questions, or, if you narrow the field, or what you end up buying. We always like to get feedback.
One quick thought. The one thing I thought that he didn't mention that was nixed off the list was the Highlander. The Highlander, the Toyota Highlander, has long been dismissed as kind of this couch, not very good car to drive. But that's not the case anymore. You can also get the XSE trim level, which turns it up even more. It's also available as a hybrid. Which is cool. Definitely the one to get. It's powerful enough, and its fuel economy is leaps and bounds better than everything else. And since he's open to, because he said 2018 or newer, I mean, there's used car prices and selections are like nuts right now. But it's feasible you could get like a 2018 Acura MDX for less than 40 grand with a reasonable number of miles on it. And that's a pretty nice car. It's in terms of a used car buy, it's a smart one. It will definitely have enough space for you, and it'll be a more elevated experience than the typical non-luxury crossover. So that would be a good alternative used car choice.
This definitely feels like, because of what they're looking for and some of the things they've eliminated, it almost begs more questions than I think the answers in some way we provide. Because I'm starting to rack my brain now. You want to be a little sportier? Well, think about some of the Volvo wagons or cross countries. That could be interesting. That's a little bit more than 40 grand. Is 40 grand like a hard line, or just what you'd like to spend? You get into the used market, but the used car market is bonkers right now. So a lot of questions here. But like I said, if you really like the Blazer and you can live with the edge, like you said, get the Blazer. But otherwise, I would probably do Telluride. That's what I like. So
I'm still saying Sorento.
Sorento, all right.
Well, simply because you're not going to be able to get a Telluride.
That's true too.
Mine's based in in just facts on the ground.
To get a Palisade, because you can maybe get those slightly more. I don't know. True. That's actually Byron Hurd wrote a post on that, on how it was like the cure of if you can't get a Telluride, get a Palisade, because hey, they're pretty much the same thing in many ways. Yeah. So. Cool. Big plans for the weekend, James. I know you're not going to Monterey. What are you doing?
No, I'm not. Well, I'm going to LA.
Okay, have fun.
Going down to LA. It's my son's first birthday, and so we were planning to go down to LA to visit some family anyway. So we'll be heading down there, visit some friends and family. I have a Toyota Camry XSE waiting for me. I have not driven the somewhat updated Camry yet, so this was an excuse to do so.
I think you'll like it. I drove that. You know what? Camry is I have no problems with the Camry. Let me put it that way. I think what they've done to it in its old age is it's sporty, it's fun, it looks good. In fact, I want to say it was Easter weekend. We had a bright red one with a bright red interior, and it was just what is going on with this thing? I think we even told my son it had something to do with the Easter Bunny or something, just because it was the interior was so red. But
well, I have an XSE. Mine might even have that. But yeah, it's not that old. It's only 2018. And if it wasn't for the fact that the Accord was so much better than it was before, the Camry, even just the most basic, like, brown LE version is so much better to drive than the older one. It's just the new platform changed everything. And that goes for everything on Toyota's TNG platform. So nothing bad to say about the Camry, but I am interested to see it because they've kind of adapted the larger Toyota infotainment system into its dash. So that's kind of the main change.
If you have nothing bad to say about the Camry, tweet or send emails to James. If you have nothing bad to say about the Autoblog podcast, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your shows. Please subscribe and please comment in the comments if there's something you want us to address in the future. Said this or spend my monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. It's been fun hanging out with you this week, James. Everybody else, we'll see you next week.